Hello, I'm John Shavacco, the co-chair of the NY-GEO 2023 conference and a board member of the New York Geothermal Energy Organization. I'd like to welcome you to this recording of a live presentation from the conference, a two-day event which was held in Albany, New York on April 26th and 27th of 2023. This year's educational sessions and keynotes represent the latest in ground source heat pump system design, product innovations, and installation practices, along with important policy, regulatory, financing, and incentive updates. This presentation is one of over 40 sessions from the two-day event, all of which were recorded and available at NY-GEO's website, www.ny-geo.org, along with session descriptions and a link to download the slides from each of the sessions presented. NY-GEO is proud to make this content available to our members and other industry stakeholders, and if you are a member, thanks so much for your support and participation. If you find this content valuable and for some odd reason you are not yet a member, consider joining NY-GEO at the appropriate membership level with details available at our website. The live recording from the NY-GEO 2023 conference will start in just a moment. Thanks so much for listening.
All right, everyone. Welcome to the Designing New York City's first net zero development panel. We are going to be talking about a project called Arverne East in the Rockaways. It's probably the only 116-acre vacant land site, well, no longer vacant, but formerly vacant oceanfront land site in the New York City area. That's true? All right. All right. I've been paying attention long enough, apparently. No. We have some panelists to talk about everything that's required to really come into a one-of-a-kind project, not only because of the land area, but because of all of the different sustainability measures involved. Everything from passive house to solar to geothermal to how to handle rising tides in floodplains. And it brings together a culmination of a lot of years of experience that the development team has been working on. So we have four panelists to talk about kind of what's involved in a project like this. Sara Levenson's a senior director of L&M Development Partners in New York City, one of the three developers that's involved in the project. Sam Gerber from CDM Smith, part of the design team. Sue Dougherty from NYSERDA with the Clean Heating and Cooling Program. This project was awarded a Category B design study under the Community Heat Pump PON. And then Brian Urlaub with Salas O'Brien, who did the initial master planning and feasibility study. And everyone's going to talk about kind of how a project like this comes together. So with that, we'll let Sara get started.
Thanks, Zach. Hi, everyone. I was just talking to Sam about how hard it is for me to get through a project like this in 10 minutes or less, and also without losing my breath, so please bear with me. As Zach had said, the project site, do I have to?
Otherwise people can't hear you.
Okay, it's a 116-acre site, beachfront in Rockaway. It's bounded by, next slide. We haven't practiced this much. Next one. Yeah, there we go. It's bounded by Beach 32nd Street to the east, Beach 56 Place to the west, Edgemere Avenue to the north, and the Rockaway Beach Boardwalk to the south. In 1968, it was designated an urban renewal area. It was a city-owned site, or it's still partially a city-owned site, under the jurisdiction of the New York City Department of Housing Preservation and Development. In 2006, the development team of L&M Development Partners, Bluestone Organization, and Triangle Equities were designated the development rights to the site through a competitive RFP. The site is broken up into two main pieces, the nature preserve to the west, which you see in the green, and the development site to the east. Currently, the nature preserve is now under the jurisdiction of the New York City Parks Department. Next slide. Ooh. There we go. So this is an illustrative rendering to give you a sense of what the site will look like when fully developed in context. Really what we're trying to do here is push the envelope for innovative, cutting-edge energy efficiency strategies and resiliency as well. We're really looking to hope our goal for this project is really to show that you can build a mixed income, mixed use, environmentally just, energy efficient, what am I missing? Resilient project on the coastlines. So we're pretty excited about that. Next slide. So just working through the development program, starting with housing. When fully built, we will have approximately 1,900,000 square feet of residential floor area across 1,650 units of housing of various typologies, from mid-rise multifamily to single and two-family townhouses. And what we're really excited about is we're bringing back a code-compliant bungalow to the area. The project is also a mixed income project. 80% is income restricted and affordable to households earning between 30% AMI and approximately 120% AMI. 20% will be a for sale market rate product. Looking at the non-residential space and going from west to east, so we will be providing an approximately 3-acre not-for-profit run urban farm and native plant nursery. In addition to that, 10.5 acres of privately owned, publicly accessible open space throughout the development site to be programmed for both passive and active recreation uses. There is approximately 300,000 square feet of non-residential space anticipated across commercial, manufacturing, and community facility uses. I'm sorry, my neck keeps like. Across community facility uses. We're also assuming a mix of retail typologies, including neighborhood retail and services to support the existing community members there and also future residents that will be living in the development. It will also include an 150-key boutique hotel, which will provide year-round programming and services, event spaces, meeting rooms, and a great alternative to JFK accommodations. We'll also be providing beach concessions, which are seasonal and really engaging with the beach plaza to the south and the boardwalk. They'll be bike-friendly, pedestrian-friendly, and paired with complimentary programming throughout the summer months. The retail program will be anchored by the Rockaway Brewing Company Brewery and Tap House. This will provide a year-round draw to the project and our residential promenade. The Rockaway Brewing Company is a local craft brewery in Rockaway that was formed and founded there. Next slide. So how to approach development of, as Zach said, 116 acres of property that had been left vacant and underutilized for 50 some odd years, that was decimated by Sandy. So the most important thing is resiliency. We don't spend a day in our office not mentioning resiliency as it relates to in the context of this project. So we looked at it on 3 scales, from a land development perspective, from a topography perspective, and really manipulating elevation, and also at the individual building level as well. From a land development perspective, the development site itself is hugged by a dune preserve to the south of the site between Beach 32nd Street and Beach 44th Street. This provides a buffer to the north of the boardwalk but south of the development site. Most of the densest part of the site or the program is really pulled north to Edgemere Avenue, which is a major vehicular spine in Rockaway. We're also infiltrating all of our stormwater on site, speccing permeable hardscapes wherever possible, and also leveraging enhanced retention and infiltration through a system of bioswales and rain gardens. And hopefully in the next 18 months or so, we will proudly be the largest interconnected green infrastructure street in New York City with the reconstruction of Edgemere Avenue between 32nd and 38th Street. Looking at topography, we're raising the entire development site anywhere between 3 and 8 feet, depending on location, to a plus 16 NAVD 88. That's 2 feet above the Sandy flood inundation level. In addition to that, all of our residential lobbies, amenity spaces, commercial spaces, entries for those will all be up at plus 16 or higher. There are no residential units on ground floors of buildings, and all of our mechanical spaces are well up above those elevations. Okay, energy efficiency. Again, we used a very similar approach with energy efficiency as we do with resilient strategies on this project, really looking at a suite of methodologies for our execution. Most importantly, on the geothermal side, we have experience in the Rockaways with existing properties in geothermal and those that are also in construction or pre-development. So we knew that the conductivity here and the geology was a really great fit for geothermal paired with the diversity of the project. an ambient loop made the most sense to maximize energy efficiency. So all of our buildings will be connected to the ambient loop to provide heating, cooling, and domestic hot water services. The residential buildings are being built to passive house standard and will also be taking advantage of significant renewable energy and blanketing the site with PV solar arrays to, I think when we're fully built out, we're assuming about 12 gigawatt hours. Did I get that right, Brian? 12 gigawatt hours? Okay. Of renewable energy will be generated on site. So Rome wasn't built in a day. This is a phased development with a build of 7 to 10 years. Our build year is 2031. What you're looking at here are some of the assets that are currently under construction or wrapping up construction. We're wrapping up the restoration of the 35-acre nature preserve and a welcome center that will provide support to the nature preserve and to the native plant nursery and urban farm to the east. Those will actually be opening to the public later this spring. Next slide, Zach. And then also, as I mentioned, Edgemere Avenue reconstruction between 32nd and 38th Street is currently underway. These are key public benefit projects that are pivotal to the success of the overall Arverne East project. And we're currently in design of the first residential building and parking lot, which is Arverne D, smack in the middle of the site, in the first phase of the ambient loop, which will commence construction in 2024. So generally speaking, looking at our energy consumption and generation over the life of the development of the project, we took some of Brian's data, which he'll get into a little bit more on the conceptual design of the district, and started looking phase by phase what our consumption and our anticipated renewable generation would be. And that's what you're seeing charted at the bottom in the blue and the orange. And then we started comparing cumulatively, how are we doing as buildings are placed on service or products are placed in service. And so what you're seeing is that at the end of the development in 2031, our on-site generation will exceed our anticipated consumption. We're looking at leveraging additional innovation in these technologies and others to continue to widen the gap between our generation and our consumption. I think the combination of the ambient loop and the passive house is really what is making NetZero possible here, also leveraging site design and scale as well, but we're able to achieve NetZero on site without any off-site purchasing or recs. I guess I'm gonna hand it over to Brian.
Brian, you want this slide up? You want it?
Yeah, thank you. My name is Arverne East. I'm with Salas O'Brien, NY-GEO. And I don't know, was it maybe a year and a half ago, something like that, Sara gave us a ring and said, hey, we got this project and we got some really ambitious goals. And we looked at it and we thought, yeah, you do. This is really ambitious and how exciting. We were tasked with initially just an energy feasibility study and then kind of got more into a little bit of a conceptual design and looking at an ambient loop and geothermal and how this all might tie together. And then, of course, we got into the energy side with solar and looking at passive house. We did a bunch of analysis on, different building types. And we obviously couldn't run load calcs on a lot of these buildings and energy models because they weren't even designed yet. But we had to do our best to, do some aggregating and do some high-level kind of energy profiles and then put that all together and come up with a plan. And what does this look like? Does it look like we can get to net zero? How close are we? What technologies do we have to utilize to get there? And so one of the first things we did was kind of develop the ambient loop roadmap, and that's what you see on the next slide, right, Zach? Go forward there. This was just kind of the first concept of, where, number one, where can we put all these assets, and then how do we interconnect those assets to the buildings? And that all looked pretty good. Initially, we, put the plan down, started drawing lines on it, and it all kind of, just kind of came together pretty quickly. And then we get on a call, and Sara goes, well, wait a minute, this is all getting built at once. We got to phase this, okay? Now that throws a whole nother wrench into everything because a lot of the space where we have assets to serve a certain load wasn't going to be available until the next phase. So then you have to start going, okay, well, how do I interconnect all this and have enough resources and energy to actually get the first phase off the ground and get the second phase off the ground before you actually can interconnect everything in the final design. And so if you want to go to the next slide, actually it might be, where's the color-coded one? Or did that get taken out? Oh, maybe it got taken out. Oh, well. Anyway, so there was we kind of went through the phasing in the construction kind of schedule and looked at how do we build this out and where can we put these assets and make it all work. And that's why there's actually a few double lines on the single pipe. And those are really temporary pipes for the phasing schedule to be able to make it a loop, if you will, until the next phase is built, and then that would actually get shut off and force the fluid down the street to the next set of buildings and the next energy sources. So there was a lot of discussion conceptually about how do you make this work. But then, of course, we got into the energy side, and if, Zach, you want to go to the next slide. We looked at, kind of what the baseline would be. Obviously, everybody, when you do these studies, you have to have a baseline. And then we looked at what is just an all-electric option? What does that look like from an energy? And we also looked at carbon. What do those look like? And then what's a geothermal solution look like from an energy and carbon perspective? And then last, we added in sewage heat recovery or waste heat recovery. And so those are kind of the 4 bar graphs in the energy. And you can see, the savings is tremendous when it comes to energy. And then, of course, when you put dollars and cents to it, it looks really good. But the biggest one was the carbon. How do we get to the net zero? And I think that's the next slide, right? Yeah. So, when you add the solar component to this, because it's an all-electric development, now you can actually get to net zero. Not just net zero carbon, but net zero energy. You're actually producing more on site than you're using because we're very efficient and we're capturing every bit of energy that we can. We're sharing energy. That's kind of the study that we went through. It was really intense and a lot of fun. When you have big ambition, big goals like that and a lot of ambition, I think it really brings the team together and you can collaborate and open people's minds a little bit. And I think there was a lot of that going on. So we really appreciated the opportunity. But yeah, it's a fantastic project.
Yep, so I'm Sam Gerber with CDM Smith. We're doing the design for this project. And so where we start with the design, where you start in every geothermal project, building energy modeling. So as we kind of hinted at with the way we talk about phasing, a lot of these buildings are not yet in an advanced stage of design because they're not getting built for another 10 years. So where we're at is we do, in EQuest DOE 2.2, block energy loads for these buildings with the information that we have right now. And to kind of get around the fact that the buildings aren't being built for quite a while, we run a significant number of sensitivity analyses on all of these buildings to try and account for, the different things that we think can happen within the next 10 years when these buildings get built. You'll notice, because of the way that these buildings are all designed, passive house, from what we do know, they're all going to be significantly cooling dominant. These are very tight buildings, very high degree of insulation, which leads to some challenges in designing our geothermal and ambient loop systems. So, moving on to the ambient loop side of the system, separate form of energy modeling. We use Transys for this part. We take the data that we got from our building energy models. We put them along an ambient loop, along with all of our bore fields, along with a dry cooler that we're going to need because these loads are so cooling dominant. And we enter that in, and we get the data that's shown here. So if you look at our diagram up at the top, this shows the temperatures as you flow around our ambient loop on the site. The end goal of what we're trying to do is keep the entering water temperature to all of the buildings 90 degrees or below. You'll see this iteration doesn't necessarily hit that at every point, but that's sort of our general goal for the design. What you'll notice when you look at this, so it's probably a little tough to read those, but each one of those nodes represents either a building or a bore field along our loop. So you'll see the temperature jumps. So this represents, and actually should have led with that, this represents a summer day 20 years into the future, which is how long our analysis runs. So you'll see, as you go through a bore field, your temperature drops So that would be a bore field. You go through that, you bring the temperature back down, enters a building, accepts heat that gets rejected during an air conditioning process. Temperature rises back up until you hit another bore field and drops down. And it makes this fun little roller coaster of temperatures all around the site. So if you look at then the graph down below, you take this thing and focus just on one node over the course of 20 years, and we see the trend that we're really aiming for when we do the designs of these systems, and it's that we want to see a flat temperature curve, not increasing. So you'll see, over the course of a year in the summer, you'll have higher temperatures as you reject heat in. Winter, you'll have colder temperatures. Sorry, I think I have that flipped. But anyway, you get the picture. So what we want to see is that we stay below that 90-degree mark and that we don't have a runaway temperature increase moving forward into the future so our system can maintain operation. So buried the lead a little bit on how the ambient loop system works. I'm sure most of you are familiar with it. However, so there's really three main components that we look at when we design it. We have our geothermal loop fields, we have our ambient loop, and then the building HVAC systems themselves. The building HVAC systems, they either take in energy or expel energy into the system. They're connected by what we call heat transfer stations. We'll get into those more in a minute. The ambient loop moves all of that energy around the entire site, and then we use our manifolds to connect our ambient loop to our geothermal loop fields to eventually essentially store that energy in a battery-like fashion to use in a different season. So looking at that, yes, the main component of the system, the ambient loop that runs around the site, does look very similar to what Brian showed us a minute ago. You'll see we pass underneath the streets that run around the site, a mix of public and private streets, which is another design consideration that we take into account. Getting the right-of-ways and taking care of what we need to for coordination with utilities under the streets and things like that. So this is all powered and pumped around the site in the first building that's getting built, Building D. We have an ambient loop pump station in there that provides all of the pumping power to pump the fluid around the site. The loop will start off very small in the first phase and eventually pump all the way around. The way that pump is controlled, that just operates to maintain a differential pressure around the loop. We want to have a more or less constant flow in the ambient loop. Shouldn't change very much. Second component of the system are geothermal loop fields. These are the bore fields that we all talk about in all these presentations. On this site, they're located entirely within site parking and green spaces. So we're doing our best to avoid putting any boreholes under buildings, because in this case, we don't have to. It's a cost reduction. So in each of these manifolds that connect the loop fields to the ambient loop, you'll see we have pumps. The manifold, these pumps operate, the way that this is controlled, they maintain the temperature of the ambient loop within whatever set points we set, 40 to 90 degrees. More on this in a minute. These pumps also act as backup ambient loop pumps. With the way that we have this circuited and looped, if we ever need to bypass, those become the ambient loop pumps. Finally, heat transfer stations. These are what go in these stations go in all of the end users. They connect them to the ambient loop. We want the end users decoupled from the ambient loop to prevent a situation where you could spring a leak in one of these townhomes, bungalows, buildings. You don't want to drain the system from all your neighbors. So decoupling heat exchanger in the middle, and there are pumps for the building side condenser loop and for the ambient loop side to take fluid off of our ambient loop system. Those pumps read the temperature on the building side of the loop and operate to maintain the condenser water temperature in the buildings between the set points that they're set at. Okay, so and as Brian discussed a minute ago, part of the complication of this project, it's not all built at the same time. We have to take into account project phasing and planning so that every bore field has a capacity to serve the bore fields come online to have capacity to serve the phase that's currently being built. And as Brian said again, you need to have a closed loop at every part of the system. So sometimes that will result in essentially doubling back. And what we end up doing with those parts where it doubles back, it does technically get abandoned. However, what that then becomes is a bypass loop for future phases. So that's where, if we need to, we can close off, say that there's a leak in one part of the system, and actually this shows better on the next slide. You'll see these are the parts of the system where these were required for an earlier phase to close the loop, and then they become more or less abandoned when the final loop is all installed. However, should you have a leak, say, in this part of the system, you are able to close valves to close this part of the system off temporarily while you get it fixed, and you can still maintain operation in this upper part of the loop using your geothermal bore field pumps as an ambient loop pump to drive flow in that part of the loop. So just for a quick overview on the parameters for the final system that we're proposing to design. We're totaling right now 482 boreholes across 9 bore fields. As we mentioned in all the other projects, we can't go beyond 500 feet deep, so we are at 499 feet for all of them. For freeze protection purposes, we're at 25% propylene glycol inside all the loops, and then our dry cooler capacity right now is at 300 tons. Spacing in the bore fields between 20 and 30 feet, as dictated by energy modeling. And with that, I'll pass it to Sue.
Thank you. So my name is Sue Dougherty. I'm on the clean heating and cooling team at NYSERDA, and I'll already warn you that the information in my slides is not nearly as exciting as what these folks have shared on this panel. Be a little bit drier, but I'm going to go over high level some of the policies that we have in New York State and why projects like this are so important for helping to decarbonize across all the different sectors. And I will warn you that I am a thermal energy network enthusiast, so most of my remarks will be in regards to that, because that's where I spend a lot of my time during the day thinking. But if you take a look at the graph over here on the left, you can see how emissions are split up across the different sectors in New York State and buildings. And Zach, if you don't mind scooching over just a little bit, sorry. I did not memorize the slides. So buildings are responsible for about a third of the emissions in New York State, and that's largely attributed to burning fossil fuels for heating and hot water. And so projects like this at Arverne East are wonderful because these thermal energy networks are a great way to decarbonize heating and cooling. Of course, this is a project that represents new construction, and a lot of the buildings in New York State that we have now will continue to exist into 2050. So we need strategies that not only will help to decarbonize or start from a clean slate with new construction, but solutions that will help decarbonize existing buildings. So there's some guiding documents that can help us get there. Released in December of last year was the Carbon Neutral Buildings Roadmap, which I'll touch on a bit in an upcoming slide. We have pretty aggressive targets to reduce emissions, 185 TBTU, and I'm realizing through previous presentations that we should be talking about it in kilowatt hours if we really want to resonate with this crowd and with the electricity sector. And I apologize for the font. It looked a lot darker when I made these slides on the computer, and now I'm realizing it's a little bit of strain on everybody's eyes. So these slides will be available after the presentation, so if you want to go and darken the font and actually see the words that are on there, you'll have the opportunity to do that. But I'll read some of the information on the slide. So this is the approved scoping plan from December of last year. It lays out the framework for how to decarbonize across all the sectors in New York State. And like I said, I'm more of a thermal energy network enthusiast, so not to play favorites. But one of the strategies in there is the implementation of thermal energy networks. And we're doing that in a couple of different areas. If you had an opportunity to sit in on other presentations, you were able to see the utilities talk about some of the proposals that they put in through the Utility Thermal Energy Networks and Jobs Act. And those projects are still in the selection phase with the Public Service Commission. So we're not quite sure where we'll land with all those projects. But a couple of years ago, we launched a program called the Community Heat Pump Systems Program. And like Zach mentioned at the beginning, this project was awarded Category B funding through that program. And we have about 53 project sites throughout the state that are being funded through PON 4614 to study the feasibility, design, and build these systems. And we're really excited to share that about half of those projects or more are either located in disadvantaged communities or include affordable housing. And through the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act, we have a goal of directing at least 40% of the benefits of the work that we're doing towards disadvantaged communities. There's a lot of, throughout those different projects, we're scoping out a lot of different project types. Some are community-based, some are campus-based, and through those we're looking at various different ownership and financing models. And we're starting to publish the results of those studies online. So if you go to our website, the Community Heat Pump Systems website, you'll find the first batch of project reports for feasibility studies, so you can look at the different ownership and financing models that are used in order to make these projects pencil out. So this is the carbon neutral buildings roadmap that I mentioned a little bit earlier. It has, if you have some free time, it's only about 188 pages, so you can pour through that and find out about a lot of different policy strategies, and highlights examples of where we've successfully demonstrated decarbonization of buildings using electrification and energy efficiency approaches. You can see some highlights from our Buildings of Excellence program, where the multifamily buildings have been decarbonized using very efficient building envelope and electrification solutions. And like I said, 188 pages of thrilling material, so please pour through that when you have the chance. And starting in 2027, actually starting now, what we would really like to see is all buildings built net zero, or all buildings with high efficiency and using electrification solutions. I think I don't need to convince most people in this room that it's a no-brainer for new construction, but we also should be pursuing these solutions in existing buildings as well. How am I doing on time, Zach? Is the bar open yet? Don't run out of here. We're the only thing standing between you and the open bar, but if you do go out, save me an IPA. So now I'll talk about a little bit about what NYSERDA can offer to help with decarbonization solutions. So I have up here communities, local government, and campuses, but really that's just kind of splitting it up into the different types of thermal energy network project types, or how we can address these things at a community scale. So on the right are some resources that we have, because although I love thermal energy networks, really carbon neutrality depends on solutions that address everything, including solar, battery storage, and thermal storage, which is integral to thermal energy networks. So you can find these resources on our website. It's directed at local governments, but we're really just trying to create project champions throughout the state. So although this is directed at local governments, we're all out here spreading the message. I talk about heat pumps a lot at work, and I can't help but talk about heat pumps a lot at home. So I feel very proud that my mother now points out all air source heat pumps that she sees to me. The next step in my outreach is to get my mother to point to a group of buildings and go, wow, those buildings probably all have diverse loads, and we should connect them together, and so they can share thermal energy and share the same common thermal resource. So it's really what we're trying to do is through the Community Heat Pump Systems program, in addition to the feasibility, design, and construction projects, we're also working with experts to develop guidebooks. So eventually, it's forthcoming, but there'll be a guidebook out on our website, similar to these other guidebooks, that will basically help people walk through the steps of how to implement a thermal energy network project, so we can help embed those local champions to make these projects evolve. And I have a couple of colleagues in the audience, Marilyn Monroe and Marilyn Moore. Sorry, Marilyn. I knew I was going to do it eventually. I wish. That would be pretty awesome. Marilyn Moore, who and Plami Kostova, who are helping to run our community thermal energy network, Charettes. And so that is a contract that we have with Pace Energy and Climate Center, and we're working with local municipal officials throughout the state. So it's closed sessions to municipal officials, but if you're interested in getting your municipal officials interested, please come to us, and those charrettes are meant to really help educate them and spread the awareness and get people comfortable with the idea. So when they're doing their citywide planning or they're doing their municipal planning, this is top of mind as a way to help them reach their greenhouse gas emission reduction goals. And then there's a lot of other programs. So we also have funding support. People always want to see where the money is, and there is money out there. So we have a couple of programs that are catered towards more campus-type opportunities. So the Clean Green Campuses, formerly known as the Rev Campus Challenge, is more of a concierge type of service that helps campuses come up with solutions for decarbonizing their campuses. And then the FlexTech program is really what I like to describe as the gateway program. So once you get into FlexTech, it's a great opportunity to do a study. It can be a campus-wide study, it can be a community-wide study, but we would love to work with solution providers and communities and intake them through that program to do a feasibility study for thermal energy networks. So that, please get in contact with me, or Google the FlexTech program, and we'll help get you situated so that you can study the feasibility of a thermal energy network for your campus or community. And I'll pause there and see if there's any questions.
All right, so I'm just gonna put up the pretty overview slide of the district. So there's a few things that we talk about often. The first is which townhouse or bungalow I get. The second is how to exempt that from the building on the business model perspective. And then the third, more serious one, is how do you actually pay for something like this? Part of the challenge with a project like this is it's in PSEG Long Island, which has its pluses and minuses, one of them being that they don't pay into the system benefit charge. So typically they're not able to access NYSERDA funding. So we were fortunate enough that they added another source of funding that was able to help fund, the design of this project. But Sara, do you want to touch a little bit on kind of the public-private partnership with HPD and just how a project like this, comes together from that? And keep in mind, there's a bar right after this. So like the the minute version.
Sure.
There's a microphone.
I thought you were saying that so it can calm my anxiety, because how do you pay for $1.5 billion worth of investment? So I think public-private partnerships are key to this project. As I mentioned before, it's being developed on city land. It's 80% income restricted. And so really having those partnerships with HPD, HDC, but we're also working with DOT, DEP, the Parks Department, and also New York City Hall. I think I got all the acronyms. And now NYSERDA, thank you. But really, it's a very, very difficult execution, not only to be able to finance affordable housing at the levels that we're trying to achieve, but also we're talking about land development here in New York City. This project, or this site, was abandoned for 50 years. The infrastructure is from the late 19th century and really doesn't support the development or any development currently. So, definitely the partnerships with the public sector are incredibly important, not just from a financing standpoint, but also just from a regulatory standpoint. We're doing a number of things here that have never been done before. and really being able to work closely with your agency officials to understand the larger goal of the project, who we're trying to serve, and what we're trying to do here, and trying to maneuver existing regulations where government officials can bend, or when we can be creative where they can be creative. And I think it's a really great synergy to come to the table with a group of both private sector officials and public to sit down and say, how do we make this work? I tried to keep that very short.
Thanks. All right, so I think let's go to some questions from the audience. I'm sure there's a lot of questions. If not, I'll ask some more. No?
I just have some general questions for Sue. I'm interested in the kind of organizations that have applied for these kinds of projects. We all are familiar now with utilities being told to go do pilots, and so that's a whole different process. But this seemed to be much more open. Lots of different types of entities could apply. So where does this stuff have potential? I guess that's really my question. Outside of the utility space, where else might we see people choosing to do district systems?
Someone decided it was time to go to the bar already, so.
I've been silenced. So there, the way, and it's been talked about in a couple of different presentations, there are different ways to select a good project site. And to answer part of your question, we're mostly working with engineering architectural firms to do these studies. You can go on our website, and there's fact sheets that describe the different types of projects that we're working with right now, and it also lists the project developers that we're working with, or the contractors that we're working with. It's a combination of campuses and also community-wide projects. So it really just takes a cluster of buildings, well, not to make it sound so simple, but good opportunities for these types of projects are a cluster of buildings with diverse load profiles and proximity to a clean thermal resource, whether that's land space for boreholes, whether they could get permitting rights to use surface water, waste heat. And yeah, that's, I could actually hand the microphone over probably to Brian, maybe talk about some other ways to scope out a good project site.
Well, yeah, there was a good panel on that here a little bit ago, but yeah, I mean, she pretty much hit that on the head. To go to your question, I think it's primarily in the private sector. It is the developers like L&M that are starting to kind of become more aware of this technology, and obviously, especially in New York, with a lot of local law 97 kind of regulation, and from the private university side, they all signed on to climate action goals and plans. So I think that's really the driving factor to this technology, and this is the solution to answer a lot of their problems. So I don't know if those are all the folks working necessarily with NYSERDA, but I think we're seeing more of that happening. And so it's, I mean, we're the ones that are engaged in the process, but they're really the clients in the end. And it's, I think that's really just the driving force between those, the private business and the private universities that are looking at this. Yeah.
And I think I'll just add that I think a lot of the NYSERDA funding helps bridge the gaps between we have this great idea and how can we actually execute on it. Part of it is it just gives proof of concept to the market that, there's a program out there that it's a state policy goal. So sometimes it's not, as much the money, but it's the, the validation of the ideas to be able to move ahead. And whether it's a nonprofit that's looking for, how to bridge the gap between, donor funds or program funds, or if it's a university that says, do we really want to spend this much money on a study for potentially a project to die off? And then one of the cool things is during these processes, someone from NYSERDA attends the design calls and is involved in the process to instrument check-ins. So we do get some feedback, kind of in some of the learnings that they get from some of their other projects as well to help make each of the projects better. And, as Sara said, that she's finding new things that have never been permitted before in New York City, or finding a new regulation that no one knew ever existed. So, being able to share that knowledge kind of in real time helps everyone.
Hi, everybody. Andrew Steiner with Darcy Solutions. I'm wondering, Brian or Sam, did you calculate or tell the audience a little bit more about the importance of the diversity factor across buildings? How many more boreholes would you have had if these buildings were all independently connected to their own bore field? Is that math done? I think it'd be helpful for us to understand just the power of that network.
So I think you guys had the exact math in the feasibility study, but I can't tell you the number off the top of my. It's significant. It is significant.
I'll take that question. It's probably 30 to 50% more. But the biggest factor here was the fact that we didn't need to drill under buildings. We have half a dozen buildings with L&M that are under the buildings. We probably have half a dozen buildings with L&M that are located under the buildings. And it is a significant hit to both schedule and performer. So diversification is great. I don't want to underplay it. But the cost of savings and carried interest in getting rental units on the market, especially when they're much needed affordable housing, is sometimes a bigger driving force on a project like this. It should be on.
It's on? It's on? All right. Just one other thing to that point with the ambient loop system, especially when you're talking about this long of a pipe to wrap around all this. I mean, that all has heat transfer as well, and that's one of the other benefits to, whenever you're moving fluid through a pipe, you do get some benefit to that. Now, depending on how close you are to the surface and what it's backfilled with and a lot of different, other factors, but most of the time that's a net benefit. So that could also help reduce boreholes. So it's not just leveling out those peaks because you're not putting a borehole field in for every peak of every building, but now you're aggregating all that and you can share, but you also get the benefit from the actual loop itself. So that's giving you maybe 5 to 10% of the energy within that. Yeah.
Yeah, and to quantify it, there's about 2 miles of ambient loop pipe on this project. George, there's another question up here.
Hi, that was great. Did you say how many units of affordable housing it would include? I know you talked about the square footage.
Sure. There would probably be, there's 1,650 units of housing total, and 80% of those will be income restricted, so approximately, doing math in my head really quick, 1,330 units.